Hello and welcome to The Sharpening. I am your host, Josh Peck. We are doing something a bit different today. Up until now, The Sharpening has been a purely audio podcast, but today we're going to be doing a video interview. The audio to the interview will still be available on my website, and the entire video will be available on my YouTube channel. So if you're watching the video now and want to access just the audio, you can find that at ministudyministry.com. And if you're listening to the audio and want to watch the video, you can do that at youtube.com/JoshPeckDisclosure, as well as on my website. Also, I'd love it if you would share this video and spread the word about The Sharpening. As always, I'd love to know what you think, so feel free to email me at joshpeckdisclosure@gmail.com or get a hold of me on Facebook with any questions, comments, or even criticisms, as long as you're respectful, of course. We probably won't be able to do a video interview like this every week, but if it's something that you all want to see more of, let me know and I will get in as many as I can from here on out. All right, so that brings us to our show for this week. Lately, there's been a lot of controversy and mixed opinions about the new Darren Aronofsky film, Noah. In the Christian community, many of the same questions are often asked. Is it biblical? Should we see the movie? Should we boycott it? What do we tell others about it? And can this movie in any way be used as a teaching and or evangelistic tool? Well, we have a very special guest with us tonight to help answer those questions and many more. Brian Godawa has been a professional filmmaker, writer, and designer for over 20 years. He's an award-winning screenwriter. His first feature film was To End All Wars, starring Kiefer Sutherland. He is also the author of the Amazon best-selling series Chronicles of the Nephilim, which is a saga that charts the rise and fall of the Nephilim, giant offspring of the fallen sons of God called the Watchers. Book 1 in the series is entitled Noah Primeval. Going along with the theme of the biblical Noah story, Brian has also been very vocal in his recent blogs concerning Aronofsky's new film, Noah. So all that being said, I'd like to welcome to the show Brian Godawa. Brian, how are you doing?
Good, Josh. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking the time to do this. I know you've been busy, especially lately with this movie coming out.
Yeah, doing a lot of interviews and written a lot of postings and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. From the ones that I have read, they're very well written, and I can definitely agree with what you say in there, even though I have not seen the movie myself yet. But well, all right, awesome. Before we jump in here, for those who may not be familiar with you or your work, could you give us a quick rundown of your testimony, how you came to know Jesus, and how that led to what you do today?
Sure. Go all the way back there. Okay. Well, in high school, I basically became a Christian, and I had always been an artist, and I think that I was kind of an iconoclast when I was young, and so consequently, I really didn't believe the religion that I was brought up in. It was pretty stale, and my parents were nominal. They went through the rituals, but it's not like it was real for them. But what happened was I started going to a youth group that was sort of more relevant in how it applied the Bible, not this, really, I don't know, sometimes the way churches can just be so removed from reality and it's hard to relate.
Oh, yeah.
For the first time, of course, this is many years ago, but for the first time, I had actually been exposed to an expression of the gospel through, of all things, they did drama at this. It was like a youth group, and at the time, it was very unique. They had rock music, they played like sports games and stuff, and then they also had a message, and would also do multimedia, and do dramatic arts and stuff. So of course that really appealed to me, and it made me sit up and listen. And they also explained the notion of the gospel in simple terms that made sense, that sort of broke through all the religious clutter that I had been around for so many years. And it kind of became real to me that, oh, I realized, the basics of I thought I was basically a good person, and I soon realized that when I compare myself with God's law and that perfection and God's holy perfection, I realized that I wasn't going to hack it. In fact, I'd pretty much violated every one of God's laws, if not literally, certainly in my heart. And I realized that I had to admit that I was just as wicked as anybody else, and just as much in need of a Savior. My sin had separated me from God, and I needed to have atonement, And so I didn't have a real big emotional, dramatic conversion. It was really more, it made sense. It struck me as true, and the things fell into place, and I committed my life to Christ, and I didn't really do anything. It sort of changed me, because then all of a sudden I started seeing the world differently. I started having more of a longing desire to know God, to pray, to read the Bible, that kind of stuff, and fellowship with Christians. And so I grew from there. But I'd always been an artist. And one of the troubles that I've always had has been in the church. The church often does not have a very healthy relationship with the arts.
Right.
Sadly, I have to admit, it's rejected them more often than not. And of course, we had the time period around the Renaissance where there was a mixture of humanists, but also a lot of Christians doing great art. But after those years, in the more modern, recent years, the church just tends to be, I think, sort of fearful of it, because it tends to push the envelope, and it tends to be ruled by a lot of godless people. But I think basically what happened was, basically in the 1900s, I think that with the fundamentalist controversy, Christians sort of drew their wagons around themselves to protect themselves, and started to sort of withdraw from government, from politics, from the arts, because that was worldly, and they wanted to only preach the gospel and that kind of a thing. And in so doing, I feel like we've lost our connection to the arts, and arts and beauty is a way to glorify God that actually can cut through the rationalistic prejudices that we have in a way that reason can't. And so I'm not saying that it's better, but I definitely see that we are holistic beings. We are both emotional and intellectual. We are both reasoning animals, but we are also imaginative animals, imaginative, created in God's image. So these are the things that sort of I've struggled with as an artist in the church. And so I come from, a lot of struggle with Christians who often don't understand the arts, and they react negatively. They just throw it all out, because it's all bad, because there is a lot of bad. But we withdrew from the arts, so what do you think? Of course, godless people are going to rush in and control the government, the arts, and all that kind of stuff with their secular philosophies. That doesn't make it bad. That doesn't make it inherently wrong. But what it does do is it pulls us out of the channels of cultural influence. But what's really ironic is, even though all of life is political, in a very real sense, I think that politics is an expression of your religion. If you care about the poor, how do you help the poor? Well, do you make them slaves to the state, or do you encourage, independent, free market sort of mentality? These are very real realities. But on the other hand, or in addition to that, I think that we're also coming to see that, as important as government is, and as destructive as it can be, we're seeing that right now in our lives, right?
Oh yeah.
Culture is actually upstream in many ways from law. There's a famous saying, and I can't remember who it was who said it, but he said, keep your laws and your governments, give me the ballad singers of the nation, and I'll change the world. And I think that that's really true, because there have been things that have been forced through law. But by and large, I think law is often a result of the broader cultural change that allows the laws to take place. And the way culture is affected is a lot through the arts. And especially as our Western culture has become much more entertainment oriented, right? I mean, the third world's still struggling to survive and, you know, trying to get good fuel so that they can live, that the environmentalists are keeping from them because they're killing the poor people by that. But the West has grown, and now we have that free time, that luxury and all that, and so therefore we're more entertainment oriented. Well, guess what? All of entertainment communicates a message. And I wrote a book a few years back that sort of was my breakthrough into publishing with InterVarsity Press called Hollywood Worldviews. And in that book, I tried to communicate to religious people basically how movies and television do storytelling, and how storytelling actually embodies a worldview, and therefore how it influences us. And it was my way of sort of giving Art 101 or Storytelling 101 to Christians so that they could appreciate movies more and also figure out and understand the messages that are being communicated. Now, I didn't do this in the spirit of, you know, look at how all the bad stuff so you can figure out what's bad, right? And, you know, and attack it. There's a place for that if something's really bad, and we'll talk about the movie Noah in a minute. But nevertheless, and I hope I'm not blathering on here too long.
No, not at all. Go for it.
You told me to tell you a journey, and so consequently, I think that we've gotten to this point where there is a lot of negative reaction thoughtlessly, and I wanted people to be able to appreciate, because there's a lot of good things in movies. Movies are where I traffic. I'm not so much in television, or I'm now an author, a published author, yeah. And there's music and everything, but you'll see I'll refer a lot to movies. And so I wanted people to be able to appreciate good things, even in movies that they don't agree with, because you can draw a lot of helpful things and a lot of truthful, meaningful things, even if you disagree with it. But the more you're aware of how they're influencing, the less manipulated you are going to be. And people are being manipulated by storytelling, and quite frankly, more through television than movies, in ways that they don't even know, because they're just sucking it up, you know. Now again, my spirit here is not to attack and you know, my vision actually would be that Christians would stop seeing Hollywood as a Sodom and Gomorrah to flee, and to start seeing it more as a mission field to send our children into, so that the more Christians we can influence people in Hollywood, the more we can influence the nature of the arts and entertainment. And this isn't a save Hollywood overnight for Jesus thing. I mean, this is going to take generations, but and I'm part of the generation that has sort of gotten in early and building towards that goal. So that's sort of been my vision. But yet at the same time, I won't deny that we need to sometimes be discerning and point out where things are bad. And if they get so bad in a movie or a television series, you know, it's good to be able to speak up and to share what you see as the truth to people. And not, you know, like I said, I guess what I'm saying is, in some ways the stereotype is true about Christians often being negative reacting because they overblow things. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean we should just cower and just accept whatever they spoon feed us. You know, we need to interact, engage intelligently with the culture. And that's sort of my vision. That's where I come from. And to bring it up to date, you know, I've been doing that through movies through like 15 years or so, feature films and documentaries. But in more recent years, I started writing novels. And part of it comes from the frustration of how difficult it is to get a movie made. And sometimes it's impossible. Most of the time it is, right? And so, you know, it's a way to make income. It's a way to get my stories out and get thousands of people to read my stories that won't, because I've got a dozen scripts on the shelf that can't get made. And every screenwriter has that. So that's a very common thing. So, you know, I've wanted to be able to communicate my worldview through my storytelling, but in an entertaining way. And so in recent years, yeah, I started with novels, and the first novel that I wrote was called Noah Primeval. And Noah Primeval began a few years back, like I think 3 or 4 years back. And what had happened was I had always thought that the most bizarre passage in the Bible was Genesis 6:1-4.
Absolutely.
I know am I talking too much? Do you need to get more questions in?
No, I'm interviewing you.
Okay,
you go ahead and talk all you want. You're making my job a lot easier.
Raise your hand if you got a question. Hope I'm entertaining, because that would be bad if I'm boring. Anyway,
no, you're not boring at all.
All right. Well, and I'm somewhat familiar with your show and your audience, so I'm sure your audience is obviously very familiar with that. But from my perspective, it was the most bizarre passage, and I'm basically I call myself an evangelical Reformed Christian, so I'm pretty standard in terms of believing the Word of God, and but I also believe the Word of God is full of poetry and figurative language. I don't believe it's all hyper-literalistic, but nevertheless, I come from that perspective that it values the text very highly, and so sometimes when we face these weird passages, we just sort of brush over them or just say, well, that's weird. Maybe we'll never know what that means, And around that time, I discovered Michael Heiser, and Michael Heiser is an evangelical scholar, biblical scholar, and he's written on this material about the giants and about Genesis 6:1-4 and about the Nephilim and all that. And it sort of opened my eyes to recap. Genesis 6:1-4 says that the sons of God in heaven saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they came down and they mated with them, and they bore the Nephilim, which means giants, and they were the great men of old. And then it talks about how the whole earth had been corrupted. All the flesh had been corrupted, and God brings the flood because of the sin and wickedness of mankind. And of course, our standard evangelical approach is, well, the flood's because of man's sin. It can't be anything else. But after studying and realizing that one passage in Genesis is not a bizarre singular passage, it's actually connected to a thread that goes throughout the whole Bible. Now, it's not, it's not at the forefront everywhere, but there are references to the Nephilim, to the Watchers, to this storyline, and it all begins, and I had heard too many years ago. I had heard Chuck Missler, and at the time I heard him, it seemed kind of weird to me, and I kind of brushed it off. So he also was, his teachings on it sort of made me aware of what was there. But doing the research myself and finding the storyline, what became so inspiring to me, it was so fabulous of a story, and I'm a storyteller, so I said, I got to retell this story, and I got to tell it for the faithful people, who like the Bible. And that's where Chronicles of the Nephilim came in. The first novel was Noah Primeval, and it was all about the flood, and then it went to a prequel, Enoch Primordial. And then it goes on to Gilgamesh Immortal, Abraham Allegiant, and even into Joshua Valiant and Caleb Vigilant. So right now I've got 6 out of 8 books written. And the heart of it, though, is, these giants, what are they for? And then when you read in Joshua, and you can't deny this, people try to, but you just can't. They talk about, the spies come back and give a report in the land. They say the Anakim are there, and they're people of large height. Mm-hmm. And they come from the Nephilim. And where were the Nephilim referenced elsewhere in the Bible? The one place is Genesis 6:1-4. So there's a deliberate theological connection between these giants that are in the Promised Land and these Nephilim before the flood. That's the sort of the beginning of things that started to stir the pot and was really fascinating to me. And so I started that journey. I've been on it for the last few years, and like I said, I'm interested in the ancient biblical approach to this. And the other thing that it sort of helped me to make sense of it was, it's not enough to just say, well, there's these giants and they're bad guys, and the angels are cohabiting with humans and creating hybrids, and what, but and I can even understand if the text says all flesh was corrupted. So there's a corruption going on. Angels are violating the heavenly earthly divide, right? And God doesn't want that. But also there's other maybe corruptions going on as well. But it still is, the picture is like, but why would they do that, And then of course that led me to the proto-evangelion, and that's in Genesis 3:15, where God's cursing the serpent, and he basically says, that your offspring, your seed of the serpent, is going to be at war or at enmity with the seed of the woman. She shall crush your head, you shall crush her heel. And of course that, scholars tell us that is the first messianic reference in the Bible. And so that's very important, that there's this notion that the seed of the serpent, the offspring of the serpent, will war with the seed of the woman. And who is in the seed of woman? Well, if you look at Genesis 1-6, you see a separation thing going on there, separation of righteous line from the unrighteous. You see Seth, who replaces the dead Abel, and Cain has this, he kind of represents the godless line. And so there's this separation of God is bringing about a lineage. And what is the lineage for? Obviously, for those of us who know, and it's not obvious, it's the Messiah. It's Messiah, right? Yep. Messiah will crush the head of the serpent, and he's going to bring that. And so it's very subtle, but it's definitely theologically there. And then, of course, Noah, it says very explicitly that Noah was righteous and blameless in his generation. Of course, most Christians who are, just have a modern Western view, oh, yeah, he's righteous, he's good and blameless, yeah. But they don't realize that the Hebrew behind those words, and particularly behind the word blameless, is actually the same word that's used for the physical purity of the animal sacrifices in the tabernacle. So there is a physical purity. Noah is in a lineage that is untouched by this hybridization or this, violation of heaven and earth, right? And so God is going to spare Noah and start over humanity. And yes, man was sinful, but there's other stuff that's going on that God is also destroying. It's not just, oh, man is sinful and they're murdering and raping. Because, think about it. How bad would it really have to be to do that? It would have to be really bad. And I'm not saying it wasn't, but when you add in this other layer of what's going on with these angels, then that led me to the Book of Enoch, and the Book of Enoch is an expanded midrashic sort of interpretation of the Genesis, 6 passage, and it talks very clearly of giants, etc. And the Book of Enoch's not a book in the Bible, and I'd known about it because I love pseudepigraphal scripture, I love Second Temple, I love the ancient stuff, to know the legends and all that. But when I saw that, but I had always sort of distrusted Enoch, because that's not the Bible, that's not Scripture. And again, I'm a good Christian person who says only the Bible is the most trustworthy thing. Well, I started realizing that, something, this mentality that says only the Bible is my authority is actually not biblical, in the sense of there are other godly writers who write other things that influence us, right? A lot of Christians read Christian books today that point them to God, right? Well, they had that back then as well. And regardless of what you may think about the text, because the Book of Enoch was referenced and affirmed in the Book of 1 Peter and the Book of Jude and even the Book of 2 Peter, I say, it's so undeniable to me that there's respect for this text in the Bible that I have to respect if I hold the Bible to be authoritative. If the Bible's authoritative and it says, hey, I'm quoting this text and I'm quoting it favorably, then I've got to have some favor for that text as well. So that was the thing that started opening my mind and saying, you know what, Enoch doesn't have to be Scripture, and it's okay, but that doesn't mean you dismiss it, because that's all too often Christians are ignorant and uneducated because they just say, well, if it's not Scripture, then it's worthless. Well, that's not true. That's not true at all. And the church has never treated the Book of Enoch that way. It's always given high respect. Some, in the early years, some thought it was Scripture. So I then began to at least respect that text and learn more about it. And of course, in that text, it's a very fascinating story, and I highly recommend people, obviously read it. But that also became an inspiration for my novel series. And that's kind of where, that's the long-winded version of where it all came. How many minutes have I talked?
I'm not even keeping track. I'm just I'm fascinated by your story because I can relate to a lot of it, and especially when it comes to the Book of Enoch, because I kind of had that same struggle too at first, because I was raised traditional Baptist, so stuff like Enoch and that kind of stuff was a big no-no, and it's like, don't even look at it, don't even have it in your house, But when I started to think about it logically, I thought, okay, it's clear that the Bible doesn't tell us everything about everything. It can't. It'd be a book so big you wouldn't be able to read it if it did. So there are certain gaps. So I was thinking, okay, I could either fill those gaps in with my own imaginations and my own thoughts, or I could read something else from around the same time, and at worst, it's just somebody else's ideas and thoughts, but they're closer to the original source. So how could that really be so bad. And I agree with you that, I don't take it as scripture either, but I do believe there's truth in there. I don't think it's all just made up fantasy and all that. And I think the same about the Book of Jasher.
Yeah. Now, if I can interrupt, and you can interrupt me too. So just, I'm an interruptive guy. Related to that, and specifically, I lost track. You're talking Enoch. Yeah. The reason why Enoch is particularly important is because of this. You and I know that there is a controversy still, really, because with the interest in the Nephilim and the Watchers growing in many Christian circles, there are a lot of Christians who are trying to say that Genesis 6:1-4 is not at all about angels. It's about human beings. It's about either divine kings who claim to be gods, or it's the righteous line of Seth. And these are all these are all good theories that people make arguments for, but it's not human at all. It's only theological, or it's theologically symbolic. And of course, I'm not against symbolism, but they're denying the supernatural element of angels having sex with humans and bearing giants, and they're saying it's not giants, it's just mighty warriors or whatever. And so it is really important because, well, how do you've got good arguments on both sides biblically, but the reason why the Enoch thing is so important is Enoch very clearly says, no, these are angels having sex with humans, and it expands the storyline, and it talks about the giants a lot. So if you're going to make your arguments, and the New Testament itself quotes about the angels and their sin, and it's Enochian, so what I'm saying is in Jude and in 1 Peter, it's quoting the Book of Enoch, then those people who are denying the supernatural aspect have a much weaker argument, because we've got the New Testament on our side that is affirming a book that affirms the supernatural interpretation of the angels having sex with humans, and it's talking about the sin of the angels and how they were bound because of the sin. So really, we're not the goofy people here, or we're not the fringe people coming up with wild ideas. It's actually, we're the most biblical in terms of having the New Testament backing us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have seen so much contention about that from people that will say that it is just human. I mean, to the point of calling us, who believe that it was fallen angels, and calling us heretics and all that. Now, I would never call somebody a heretic if they want to believe that it was, just humans, or if they buy into the Sethite theory. I mean, I personally don't, but I can kind of see where they're coming from, at least. I mean, their beliefs have at least some biblical backing.
Yeah,
I
would say they do.
Yeah, I think we have more, but they think they have more as well. So, but yeah, it's strange how it's not just the Nephilim theory that's attacked, but it's those who believe in it, and we're kind of cast off as heretics, sometimes cult leaders, but yeah, it's ridiculous. You just read it. That's what the plain text says.
Not only that, but we have the church history on our side. The supernatural interpretation of the sons of God was actually the dominant view. It wasn't until basically Julius Africanus sort of started suggesting the human theory, a Sethite theory, but Augustine's the one who really made it big, because he was the big influence on the Western Church, and then Jerome supported that. So really, around 400 AD or something. So really, and again, just because the earliest belief doesn't mean the truest belief, but nevertheless, if you're going to make those kind of extreme attacks on people in the face of a high respect for that interpretation within the history of the church, it's just irresponsible and not fitting of the body of Christ, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I'd say at the very least, people can have their different views and everything, but there's so much division in the church as it is. There's no reason to cause more, especially for a non-salvation issue. We don't have to believe in Nephilim to be saved or to properly evangelize others. It's all about Jesus, and we agree on that. So, but yeah, and I've always found the whole biblical narrative of Noah fascinating. Even when I was a kid, even when I was raised with the traditional Baptist belief that it was just, well, I mean, we're all familiar with that pretty much. It's just kind of a watered down version of what really happened. And the church that I was in, they didn't deny that it was literal angels. They just never really talked about it. It was just kind of breezed over. I mean, we spent most of our time in the New Testament anyway, but
Yeah.
yeah, on the rare occasion we actually did get into the Old Testament, it was, the standard. You've all seen like pictures of Sunday school, like Noah's Ark and these cartoon animals, and it was the whole thing was a cartoon. Like even the way they told their story,
Yeah.
it was like there wasn't really anything realistic or dramatic or exciting about it. Once I started looking at it for what the text actually says, I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, because I believe that stuff. I believe everything in there is true, so I believe that happened. And it's like, oh, this is in our history. And so that kind of prompted me to look into it too. And I've always found that just absolutely fascinating. And that's why I was so excited for this when I first heard about it, for this new movie coming out, Noah. Because I thought, and especially when I found out that they were going to include watchers. Now, this was a long time ago, so there really wasn't much information available at the time, but I was excited about it because I thought, hey, I've never seen a movie that depicted Noah and all this fallen angels.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and so I was excited, and then the more I heard about it, the less excited I got.
Yeah, same here. In fact, what happened for me was a year ago or so, a little more over a year ago, I got a hold of one of the early scripts to Noah, because I'm in the Hollywood industry and scripts float around and stuff. Anyway, when I read it, it was quite disappointing, and I went ahead and blogged on it because I thought it was so extreme that I just thought it wasn't going to fly, and religious audiences probably would not like it. But not only that, it was just it just wasn't. It had so many problems.
Yeah, I read that blog. That was actually what prompted me to get a hold of you in the first place. This was a while ago. And
okay.
Yeah, because I read it. I thought it was awesome. And actually, that brings me to my first question here. That blog that you wrote, that blew up and went pretty viral. But for those who didn't get a chance to read it, what were your initial impressions of the movie, just based on that script?
Sure. Well, now I have seen the movie, so I can talk about that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, the movie is almost exactly like the script. So they've only changed minor things, so it's basically the same thing. So I was right, and that was my whole concern. Was I was telling everybody, now be cautious. A lot can change from script to screen, and that's true. I've seen, like I've written movies that what they ended up rewriting and directing were terrible. So they made it bad. So I realized that there could be a lot of difference there, and I tried to be open-minded and fair about that. But my biggest concerns were, well, first of all, let me say what I liked. I felt that it was, for the first time, really capturing that seriousness and evil of that time period. Because like you said, everyone has the flannel graphs and the cute little animals in Noah's Ark in Sunday school, and I think that's created a false picture unknowingly. And Noah's this old white-bearded man who's, a pacifist or something, right? And but really, this movie and even the script was breaking out of it and saying, well, no, if it's a real wicked, evil world, then to survive, you really have to know how to fight. And so maybe Noah could be a warrior. And I immediately took a shining to that because that's exactly what I concluded from my novel, Noah Primeval. Same thing.
Oh,
I thought,
awesome.
well, if the world's really evil, then I think Noah would have to be like a Joshua or a David in order to survive, And so I did the same thing, And the Bible doesn't say what he was. It says he was a farmer after the flood. George Washington did the same thing. So did the Cincinnatus, the savior of Rome. They were warriors and they became farmers after the war. So that's common. And my point here is that I think that my big concern was that Christians would react to the wrong things. They'd be all caught up with how the little details don't match the Bible. Like, did he build the ark with gopher wood? I mean, stuff like that. Come on, and you know, and there are things like that that I just let him have a little bit of imagination. What's more important is where those details are pointing. What's the worldview? What's the real meaning of the story? And that's what matters the most. Who cares if they change around a few things? The Bible even does that itself on some stories. I could tell you all about King David and how, you know, history is sort of moved around, you know, to make a point. But my point was that it's okay to have fantasy. There was fantasy elements. The way God draws the animals is cool. We don't know how that all happened. The Bible just says that the animals came, right? So I was okay with showing this fantasy, showing this evil, wicked world. I thought that was some cool stuff. And the fact that he wanted to have the Watchers in there. Great. Nobody's ever addressed that, but they're in there, right? But the problem was that, you know, not only were the Watchers not at all really like the biblical Watchers, you know, in the Bible, the sons of God, the Watchers, and in the Enochian understanding, the sons of God are evil. They reveal dark occultic secrets to mankind and help lead him down the path of evil, and they are there to corrupt the bloodline of Messiah, and so they're corrupting mankind and stuff. You know, they're bad. And but in the script, they were basically misunderstood good guys. You know, they came to Earth to help man, and man tried to kill him, and God cursed them, and it didn't make any sense. But basically, so they're kind of like in no man's land. God doesn't want them. Humans don't want them. You know, that's what he's trying to do. And they're giants with 8 arms. And so I realized, well, he was confusing the Nephilim with the angel, with the Watchers, right? Making the Watchers giants and sort of confusing the two and making them good guys when they were bad guys. So, you know, that was sort of like, oh, darn it, he had a great chance. And then also they were like these rock people, you know, and it's just like, what? You know, you'll see if you see the movie. We can talk about it in a minute, but it was just sort of like deflating. It's like, oh, there was a great opportunity to have these Watchers and then have the Nephilim giants, and he blew it. So that was sort of discouraging. But more importantly for other people, I thought that there are 2 main things that I saw in there. One is it was clearly a subversion of the sacred narrative of Noah to as a parable for environmentalism. In other words, God is not the ultimate here. The earth is. And, you know, I'm not some far-right kook who's interpreting into the story. Aronofsky is still to this day arguing it's about environmentalism. He's saying it, folks. And I'm just affirming the fact that, yeah, every little detail, you know, he reveals the sin of man, you know, and murdering and rapists, but really those murderers and rapists are all people who pollute the earth. That's really what it comes down to, is that's the ultimate evil. Oh, and they eat meat, and that's what makes them evil. So, you know, there's all kinds of ridiculous stuff there. And I just thought, you know what? Even though most Jews and Christians believe in being good stewards of the earth, right, and they support that basic belief, the meaning of the tale has everything to do with man created in God's image and God's relationship with man, and it's not about the environment. In fact, God completely destroys the environment because man was destroying the environment. It doesn't make sense. It shows how resilient the earth actually is, that you can destroy it all and it grows right back, right? So it's like this sort of goofy environmentalism that really, you know, takes the point off of God. God is in the story, but Aronofsky is a self-professed atheist. He does not believe in the God of the Bible. So to him, the God is a myth for something else, and it's really all about the holiness and sacredness of the earth. That's really what it's about. And I thought that that's not going to be good for, you know, religious people aren't going to like that, you know. And then the other thing was, of course, halfway through they get on the ark, and the second half of the movie they're in the ark. And again, I'm okay with, we don't know what happens on the ark because the Bible doesn't say anything. The Bible doesn't say much at all about Noah. So again, it's okay. Make creative characters, make them rich and deep. That's fine. The problem was, and the other thing was, your hero. You know, again, I'm a professional storyteller, so I know that heroes in stories have to be sympathetic, so we cheer them on. And then they also have to have a flaw, basically, in the way they see the world. So even though we're cheering them and we like them, early on in the story, you have to see that they see something wrong about the world and they do something wrong. And so the whole journey is for this hero to ultimately realize that what they're seeking after is not what they need, and they really have a need for something else. And they have to learn what their character flaw is in order to get the personal sort of character strength to fight the bad guy, the villain, and win at the end. Otherwise, he wouldn't do that, right? So you've got to have a character flaw in the hero. But this Noah was so dark that I just thought, you know what? People aren't going to like this. You don't like him. You want to walk away, because what happens is halfway through, Noah becomes so obsessive in the ark about Noah is anti-human. I mean, it's like, we just save the animals and then let us all die. I don't want any humans to live, because we're only going to mess it up again. And therefore, he's going to let no more children going to be born. And so the problem is one of the daughters on the ark has kids, has a baby, and actually it turns out to be twins, and he's going to kill these, and they're girls. And so obviously girls would continue to propagate, right? So his whole dilemma, the second half of the movie, is, should I kill these girls? I have to kill these girls. I gotta kill, and they're not born yet, right? So it's just like he's this murderous maniac, And I thought, people aren't gonna like this. You can make all the arguments you want that it's a perfect thematic journey, but it's like he's totally unlikable, totally unsympathetic and murderous, and people just aren't gonna like it. But surprise, surprise, it's exactly what Aronofsky does in all his movies. So we should, I expected this. Everyone should have expected it. The studio should have expected it. Why did they hire him to do that? To make a popular movie when this is a guy who makes these dark, unsympathetic heroes? Anyway, that's what they did, and so I was seeing this in the text, and I thought, man, I don't think this is going to fly with religious people. So those were some of my main critiques, and it wasn't about nitpicking all the little facts of where it's not like the Bible. I'm not about that, So, but all along I've had to be really cautious because, like I said, script can be different from the movie. So in the intervening time period, I'm trying to encourage people, don't boycott the movie, necessarily. I mean, if you really don't want to give your money to Hollywood, or you want to wait to see from all the reviews if it's worth it, that's fine. But if you like movies too, go see it and then use that as an opportunity to express what you don't like or whatever, or let's put it this way, it's talking about a conversation topic that no one would ever talk about before, right? Noah and the flood. Normally people just dismiss it, as being ridiculous and fairy tales and all that. But now they're talking about it, and that's good, And so I'm like, yeah, let's talk about it. Go out and, I'm trying to stay balanced. But then unfortunately, I saw the movie last night, and I had to apologize for saying, for sort of encouraging people to, to go see the movie and use it as a conversation topic and such, because no movie is perfect. There's always a mixture of good and bad, and that's actually true. And the movie's not all bad, but the movie was so bad as a movie. In other words, regardless of the theological garbage, the movie was just so bad, poorly made, that really, you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of those bad Christian movies. Everyone's always griping and complaining about Christian movies are bad because they don't do good writing, they don't do good storytelling or acting, because they're so concerned about the message, blah, 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 and that they deprioritize entertainment. Well, that's what this movie was. And so I started thinking, well, how is this movie different from Fireproof or whatever? People complain about that, right? Because what happened was, it was poor special effects. I don't know where they dumped $130 million, but the special effects were really cheesy, and the acting, actually the acting was decent for what they were given, because the writing was just not good. A lot of non sequiturs and characters doing things for bizarre reasons and not knowing why. There's all kinds of bad storytelling going on, and a lot of disconnected sort of imagery to try to make some creative statement, but it really was just sort of chaotic. And these are among several of the things, It also, so I discovered it was exactly like I had interpreted the script, so that's all the same. But in some ways it was more so. But it struck me. I thought, why don't we create a new category that we can heap scoring on movies like we do on bad Christian movies, and let's call it bad atheist movies. Aronofsky is an atheist who's trying to subvert the Christian narrative for his own secular environmentalism, right? Well, but he's so preachy and such bad production value that I would just say, it's mockable, because it's like, well, wait a minute, he's so obsessed with his meaning and message that he's neglected entertainment, and he's done this dark, huge movie that they poured hundreds of millions of dollars into it. And I suspect it will do well on opening weekend. Excuse me, I suspect it will do well only out of the curiosity factor. But the real sign to look for is the coming weeks afterwards, how big of a drop it is, because I suspect that their word of mouth is going to kill it, because the movie is just not entertaining. It's just this dark dream vision of Darren Aronofsky, you know. So that was sort of like where I ended up, and it was kind of discouraging, because I do want to encourage the discussion, and look, you know, like I said, there were some cool things. The way they depicted the flood was kind of cool, seeing the reality of evil men and being destroyed. But it wasn't that much of. They didn't put that much into the flood, though. It's sort of like a few scenes, and then you're in the ark for the rest of the movie, you know. And so, you know, there were some good things like that, some good visuals, but not all that good of visuals, because the Watchers are these goofy rock people. Their spirits basically are supposed to come to Earth, and they fell into molten lava, and then that gives them a body, right? As opposed to flesh, which is what the Bible actually says. But so they get they get in the molten lava, and that's how they get a body, and then that's what, and they end up looking like basically ancient versions of the Transformers, only they're rocks. They don't transform into cool cars and cool trucks. They transform into rocks, and then they open up, and they're rock people, and they're just goofy. They just look goofy looking and silly, and you know, I think it's a very appropriate. You know, everyone likes to mock the bad quality of Christian movies. Well, I think it's time we start mocking the bad quality of this atheistic movie.
Yeah, sounds like it. Man, that was what I was most excited for, was to see how they were going to depict the Watchers and everything. Because I remember one of the first things that I read about it was that and this kind of stifled my excitement about it. They said they were depicting the Watchers as giants with 6 arms, and I'm thinking, okay, the Watchers were the fallen angels, and as far as I can tell from biblical accounts, they looked pretty human. It was the Nephilim who were giants. It wasn't 6 arms; it was 6 fingers and toes. Based on.
Oh yeah, that's right. You're right. I was thinking, where did he come up with the 6 arms? You're right. That's probably where. No, actually, I think it was 8 in the script. So maybe they cut it down for budgetary reasons. But anyway, fair enough.
Yeah, exactly, and yeah, that comes from.
Yeah, Nephilim. Look, Nephilim nuts and Nephilim fans are not gonna like it. It's just not interesting. It's really to me, it was just sort of like a wasted opportunity. It could have been a cool thing to really support if it did, but you know, maybe at least it's opened up the discussion about Watchers. What are these Watchers? Is that all made up? And now we can say, well, no, actually it is in there. He just did a stupid version of what could have been cool, which is what's in the Bible and the Book of Enoch. You know, and so maybe we can talk about that. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think movies like that, if for nothing else, can open a dialogue, and you know, I've already even gotten a little bit of that. I haven't seen the movie yet, but so in say like in an ideal world, how should we as Christians respond to this film, like on a theological basis? If we were all to act accordingly as we should we just should we go see it, if for nothing else to provide answers for those who may ask about it, or should we just avoid it altogether?
Well, I'm all for the notion. I support it, you know, in my life, in my books, and everything I do. I love movies, so I watch a lot of movies that are bad. But so I think I can't recommend the movie because it's just a bad movie. But if you're gonna see it, I would say definitely, you know. Like, check out my posts. I got a lot of posts on my blog, which is actually, it's not on there. It's Godawa.com. I should make Godawa.com. Anyway, I'll do that in a second. But Godawa.com, my blog, and you can read. I wrote a whole bunch of stuff about how to watch the movie. This is before the movie came out. How to watch it, what things to look for. You know, keep your eye on the protagonist, because he's the meaning of the story. But also watch the villain. Because this is a whole other thing. I want to remind me to talk about the villain, because the villain is very interesting. Actually, he's very uninteresting, but philosophically. So what I'm getting to is if you really love movies and you're gonna see it, I would just say, you know, keep an eye out for what the real meaning of the story is, and try to keep in mind that no matter, you know, I think there's a lot of suck-up Christians out there, and you know. Christian film critics who don't want to be rejected by Hollywood and all this stuff, and so they're afraid to criticize it. They want to say, oh, it's thoughtful, deep, and challenging, and all this stuff. I think that really the problem is they know how bad it is. They do. But my point is that know whatever you're watching, understand it in this context. Aronofsky is an atheist. He believes in environmentalism. He doesn't believe in the God of the Bible. He believes the God of the Bible is a myth. So he doesn't believe you're God, folks. So try to figure out what's his sacred narrative. What is he spinning the story as? And try to figure it out. Make it a game, maybe, because I've heard people have laughed throughout the movie because it's sort of goofy. But you know, do that. You know, for those who don't want to waste their money on it, I'm okay with that. You know, this isn't about boycotts. Again, it's just about do you go see a bad movie or not, you know? The boycotts are old. That's gone, you know? Look, there are great movies that are evil. In fact, I would say let's go back and watch Avatar. If you want to watch naked pagan environmental worship, earth worship, at least watch Avatar, because at least it's a great story and it's a good movie. You know, I'm like, I love that story. You know, of course the philosophy made me angry. So, you know, but that's my point is that, you know, there are good movies that are worth engaging in the debate, but sometimes they're just so bad, the negative seems to overwhelm the good. And unfortunately, I think Noah's one of those cases. But look, if you want to see it, fine, see it and you know, interact with it, because on the other hand, it's just, it'll come and go, and I think it'll be forgotten. It's not going to be remembered anyway. So I guess what I'm saying is, if I was a typical moviegoer, I would probably go see the movie because a lot of people are probably going to go see it, and it is going to be the talk of the town. So fine, go see it if you want to. But on the other hand, I wouldn't put down people who don't want to throw out their money to that kind of garbage. It's just bad filmmaking, you know. So yeah, I can't recommend it, but I wouldn't call for boycotts.
Yeah, I think even though I haven't seen it, but you know, I think I'd agree with that too. Boycotting stuff, if anything, it's just going to make people want to see it more anyway. But I think it's far more productive if somebody wants to take a stance on it. You know, one way or another, they should at least be able to say that they've seen it.
Yeah, you don't have a lot of respect if you're harping about it and you haven't seen it. People aren't going to respect you. Let's be honest. That's how the world thinks. It's not always fair, actually. You know, you don't always have to see something to be able to talk about the ideas. But let me put it this way: if you don't see the movie, that's actually fine. Here's what you do: for people who have seen the movie, ask them, well, what was it about? Tell me about the movie. What happened? And then what happened next? And ask questions from what they're telling you. Ask questions to find out what it means and what it meant. At least you can do that, and then interact with what they think it means. And you know, in other words, it's more important to interact with people and what they think and believe rather than the movie. The movie is just a launching point anyway for a discussion. You know what I mean? You know, as a person out in the movie industry, I have to give my opinions about movies and stuff like that. But you know, on blogs and stuff. But for normal people, it's like, you know, if you don't see the movie, then just ask people what it was all about. Read some reviews so that you can actually ask intelligent questions. You know, and do that.
Absolutely. I know something that going along the same lines is that you know, one of the things that I had to learn early on is written about in Proverbs that, you know, you need to basically, I'm paraphrasing, but hear out something before you give an answer to it. You know,
that's good.
Yeah, and I take that stance with my research and everything. It's actually something me and a friend of mine, Doug Woodward. You know, he's written about stuff too. We've both of us have seen every episode of Ancient Aliens. Doesn't mean we believe in it.
That's hard, man. That's hard.
Oh yeah, it's rough. It's rough. It doesn't mean we believe a word of it. We don't. We watch it because we want to know what's being put out there so we can provide an answer for it. Because, you know, we get questions about it. You know, at times I get questions about it. People asking what I thought of this or.
Josh, if I can interrupt. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say a lot of people from stuff like that are falling away from the church. So it's like, well, what about this is making people fall away? So, you know,
Not only that, I'm sorry for interrupting. Not only that, but it's like Ancient Aliens. Look, I remember 30 years ago with Cheers to the Gods and stuff, it was only sort of the kook people who believe that. Now scientists and educated people are believing the ancient alien theory. And actually, in point of fact, I think it's very important to know about that because it is a growing, people are watching that crap and they're believing it. And they talk about Christians believing in ridiculous things. It's like, whoa! And I do think people need to be aware because I know a lot of people who've even seen stuff like that. Or if they haven't seen Ancient Aliens, or they've seen stuff like that, and they're like, yeah, I hear that, you know, the technology that the ancient technology could only have come from aliens out of, you know. Well, I believe that mankind was probably much more advanced than we think he was. But it's like the big difference is, of course, you know, they're spinning the ancient evidence to replace God with aliens, and that's really what it is, and that's a serious thing. And so I agree with you that it's important to know about these things and be careful that you're not one of these people who's sucking these theories up, and then go listen to the debunking stuff. You know, my favorite thing is my favorite website for that is Ancient Aliens Debunked, I think it's called, right?
Yeah.
Christian White. He did a whole documentary, and he's keeping up with debunking it, which is very important because this goofy stuff is being believed by a lot of people, and it's growing. So I think it's important to be aware and on top of things like you guys are. That's great.
Yeah, absolutely. People are so quick to jump on things that can replace God because, you know, ultimately it gets rid of their accountability.
Yep.
Yeah, the ancient aliens aren't asking anybody to alter their lives or to be held accountable for anything that they do. You know, for what we do as human beings, but you know, God does. And to people who are, you know, kind of weighing out those two options, who don't have a belief in God, well, what's more attractive? And it is ridiculous. I mean, there are people falling away from the church. I know a few personally who have, you know, they believed in Jesus their entire lives, and then just the past few years, it's just blown up, and it's everywhere. It's not just Ancient Aliens. It's in TV shows and movies, and and some of those are not good in a theological sense or a Christian sense, but they're entertaining. They're good TV shows and good movies, and, you know, I enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's what I'm saying is this stuff isn't just goofy because it's infiltrating into all the entertainment mediums, and of course it's just speculative and it's fun and it's imagination, but really people are getting their ideas from it and they're starting to think, yeah, you know, hey, maybe mankind was so ignorant that when aliens visited from another planet, they interpreted them as gods. And they're thinking like that they're coming up with this, but it's really only because they're ingesting it in all the movies and television shows and all that kind of garbage, you know. And I mean, look, respectable, great filmmakers like Ridley Scott, you know, he's a great director, and he did Prometheus, and that basically said Jesus was an alien. I mean, really? You know, but yeah, people. That's why I always, you know, we can laugh now. It's like, and you laugh at Christians for believing ridiculous fairy tales, please.
Yeah, exactly. And without, you know, they'll eat this stuff up without any kind of real proof or real, you know, findings in it. You know, there's misinterpreted things, and but I think that's what's so scary about it is it's so tantalizing to people that this could be real. And I think at the root of it really comes down to we all have a kind of a yearning for the unknown, or for, really it's for God, but some people you know, will misinterpret that and reach after these other new agey things or whatever the case may be. I think it's just part of humanity. We all have to have something to hold on to, and unfortunately much of the entertainment industry, through all this ancient alien stuff and other things, are capitalizing on that, and even making these Christian movies based on biblical themes, but they don't tend to stick with that with even, you know, even just a healthy amount of fantasy or storytelling. It goes way beyond that. So I'm sure there's a fair amount of non-believers who are going to view this interview as well. And in regards to the Noah film, how would you suggest that the non-believer community should take the movie? Would it be the same advice as Christians? Should they avoid it or enjoy watching it with a healthy amount of skepticism, or some kind of middle ground?
I don't qualify. I just for anybody, I would just say I don't recommend it because it's just not a good movie. I wouldn't recommend it for Christians if you want to see some. If you're going to expect some kind of biblical truth, it's not going to be there for you. And if you're a non-Christian, unless you're an Aronofsky licker, I mean, you're probably not going to like it. So that's kind of where I am for any group, and it's a 1-2 punch, Yeah, it's got bad theology. I was right, and I know a lot of people don't care about the theology, but it's also just got bad filmmaking. So, what can I say?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I personally I know very little to nothing about about filmmaking, but in regards to the themes that are in there, you brought up a couple, but for the non-believer and non-believer both, let's set the record straight. What is the biblical truth concerning Noah, and in what other ways does the movie deviate from the Bible? I know you mentioned something about the villain.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is precious. If you want to know who a filmmaker hates, look at their villain and listen to what the villain's rationale is, his motivations and what he really believes. There's always a few moments where the villain sort of gives his beliefs, sort of thing. And in this movie, Tubal-Cain is the villain, and and in the Bible, of course, it says that Tubal-Cain was he's in the line of Cain, and so people assume he's a bad guy. Doesn't say that, but they assume it. That's fine. And he was the origin of blacksmiths, and that's what he is in this film. But of course, he becomes this symbol for industrialized man, right? Man of the city, an industrial man, and he's very cardboard, cliche kind of character. And but what's interesting is if you look closely throughout the film, you'll see another thing I want to say is whatever the villain is, no one's going to relate to the villain because we're not the villain, right? And obviously the villain usually is an exaggerated version. But listen closely and figure out, okay, what in today's world kind of is similar to that, because they're probably making an alignment. So, for example, in the movie, Tubal-Cain, of course, he's a city dweller, but he this is funny. He's cruel. Let's put it this way: he's a meat eater. That's about probably the worst thing of all that they just keep pointing out. He eats meat, and of course, meat eating is bad, people, right? He has a gun. I'm not kidding you. Maybe ancient aliens gave it to him. It's kind of depicted as like a magical device, but it's basically a gun, right? And he's the only one that's always talking. He's the one that's preaching, man is created in God's image. Man is created in God's image, and we should subdue and have dominion. And of course, that's in Genesis, right? He's the only one who says that. And let's see what else is there. Let me get. Oh, I lost track of my thought here. I have in my.
Well, it sounds like the villain is the one that's preaching the biblical truth, and
exactly. Okay. Yeah. So he claims private property rights over the land. He carries a gun. He says man is superior to the animals. He hunts animals. He eats meat. He uses a primitive gun. So my point is, all while he's raping, pillaging, and plundering and eating meat.
Oh, of course, because they go hand in hand.
Right, exactly. And so think about this. Just be creative for a second. Who in today's world believes in private property rights, guns, clinging to their guns, believing in man as the apex of creation, basically conservative biblical Christians? So I mean, obviously it's a caricature of that, but you can see that that's one of his subtle underlying themes of ultimately what the enemy is, And that's, like I said, all villains pretty much do that, Look for that, But in other ways, in terms of, how it differs, one of the reasons why I wrote my Noah Primeval and the Chronicles of the Nephilim is that I, too, actually use a lot of fantasy. And I thought that, I suspected that there would be some Christians who don't like that because they would think that that's playing with the Holy Bible and all this. But what my goal was I wanted to use imagery that was in the Bible. If I'm going to use fantasy, I base it on imagery that's in the Bible. So you know, for instance, the Bible talks about Leviathan, the sea dragon. I know there are different interpretations by Christians, but my study has concluded that the Leviathan is a common reference to chaos that's used as symbolically and such throughout the text. And a lot of ancient religions use Leviathan. And so, you know, so I made that Leviathan a real creature, you know, a real sea dragon, right? So I do things like that. I have a lot of imagination and creativity, but I try to base it on ancient Jewish legends out of Enoch and Jubilees and Jasher and all that. I draw from a bunch of sources. What was I getting at? I wanted to, and the other thing was, I wanted to depict this evil world, because the Bible said every thought of man's heart was only evil continually. I mean, it was a wicked world. So I thought I too wanted to overcome the Sunday school imagery that is just false, you know, in the name of being true to the Bible. Even Christians can be wrong, you know. And so I depict that evil. I'd say, you know, I'd say my books are rated PG-13, you know, because sometimes they're a little gritty. But you have to, you know, my belief is that just like the Bible shows, you know, you wouldn't read Ezekiel 16 or 23 to your children because it's full of graphic violence and sex. So the Bible has a lot of that too. And so what matters is the context. What's the context and what are you pointing to? And I wanted to really capture that evil so that the justice of God would make sense, but also His mercy as He brings Noah through the flood. But this evil is rooted in a very spiritual source as well. And if you want people to believe in your redemption of your story, whatever that is, whatever you're offering as here's redemption. You have to accurately capture the evil from which you're being redeemed. So I use that as my principle as well in the book, and I wanted to sort of break through the Sunday school, you know, wimpy view of Noah, and like I said, you know, this movie does that too, and I'm actually grateful for that because it's brought up that conversation, and that's legitimate. But my goal was to sort of use fantasy. You know, it's kind of like watching Lord of the Rings. It's basically realistic stuff, but you do have some creatures and stuff, you know, but all based on biblical references, and people will see what I mean. But my goal was the genre of fantasy is a great way to tell a theological novel. I'm not trying to tell this is how it really happened, because nobody knows, and so it would be arrogant for us to say, well, I'm going to really depict how it really happened, because you don't know and we don't know much. So even an attempt to make it as realistic as possible, the Noah story, is going to be fictional, folks. So I said, you know, use a little bit of fantasy to ratchet it up, make it like almost like you're watching a movie when you're reading the book. And so fantasy becomes a genre that communicates theological truth while also, you know, embedding it within a realistic sort of picture of man and his dramatic, you know, personal issues and stuff. So that's where I think the value is, and I do think that some Christians still have a hard time with that, but I think most people have not. I've gotten a lot of positive reactions about, you know, about this, and Christians get it. More and more Christians are understanding are appreciating imagination, and I have to really, you know, be humble myself and say, wow, there's more than I had thought. I thought I was going to be attacked by Christians, but I haven't been by too many at all, and I think they're getting it. But the thing is I'm trying to stay true to the original intent of the Bible story. So even though I'm retelling it, I'm moving things around, I'm adding fantasy, I'm trying to recapture that original sort of theme, because I believe the Noah story. I believe in the biblical story. That's my sacred narrative, you know. Always, folks, I'm not saying an atheist can't make a good Christian movie, you know. I don't know the religious persuasion of the filmmakers of Machine Gun Preacher, but I thought that was a great movie, right? It can be done, but the general rule is like, okay, but when you're messing with a sacred story like a Bible story, of course, whatever the person's worldview is in their life, in their real life, the filmmaker's life, how they see life, they're going to spin the story to support their beliefs. So it's like, hello, if you're an atheist environmentalist, that's what you're going to spin it to. I don't care what all the Christians say about, oh no, it's not really that bad. It is. That's his story. That's what he's doing. He doesn't believe in your God. So that's what I'm saying is that you know, take into account the consideration of where the storyteller is trying to or where the worldview is coming from of that storyteller. And I can say, for me in my series, I think that's probably why I've gotten mostly good reactions, because they understand that. And then the other thing that I do, in my continuing shameless act of self-promotion, in the Chronicles of the Nephilim, because I'm sort of like a bipolar guy. I love intellectual stuff, but I love imagination. And a lot of times the two don't mix very well. You know, like academic people trying to write a novel doesn't do too well, and people who just write novels aren't very good theologically, right? I kind of feel like I'm in between. And so I've always loved Michael Crichton's books, because Michael Crichton was a creative writer, but at the end of every book he would put an appendix where he would explain the real science behind the fiction. And I love that stuff. I like to have a little bit of both, so I decided to do that in my novel. So at the end of every novel, I have sometimes as much as 100 pages of appendix material that provides the biblical research and the ancient historical research behind what I'm doing. It sort of explains a little bit of the rationale for how I'm putting everything together, because I think, number one, religious people aren't always quick to understand that, and I want to help them to understand it. But number two, some people just love that stuff, like me. I just love to read about the research, you know. So I try to give a little bit for both, and it's gotten such good reaction that many people are saying we love the appendices as much as the novels. And so what I decided to do was gather all the appendices, just the appendices of the research, into another book, and I call that When Giants Were Upon the Earth. I almost forgot the name. When Giants Were Upon the Earth. That's at Amazon. All the books are at Amazon. If you want to look up my name, Brian Godawa, or look up the book at Amazon, or go to the website that you see under there, Chronicles of the Nephilim. I've got tons of great information. I've got artwork. I've got free articles, cool trailers, and all kinds of stuff. But the bottom line here is that I want to provide a whole world that people can swim in and enjoy, that includes the imagination, but it really is based on what I think is a theological truth. And so When Giants Were Upon the Earth is sort of like for those who just want the Bible study stuff, you know, just give me the Bible stuff, and you know, there are people like that, that's fine. And so I just put that out this last month, and that's been selling well already, but it's kind of a big package of all these materials.
Wow, wow, that's fantastic. Yeah, I'm one of those that appreciates both ends of the spectrum. I definitely like, you know, fiction and fantasy stuff, and I really love imaginative stuff. But I also love stuff that's just, you know, strict Bible study, and especially if it's something that I've never heard before or I'm not familiar with. And that's why on this show, it doesn't really have much to do with what we're talking about today, because I think pretty much probably 90% of my listeners can agree with our take on the biblical Noah story. But you know, on this show, I'm all about getting into things that maybe not everybody can agree on. You know, and I think that's cool, and I think it's needed in the church with all the division that we have. It's ridiculous. So I think that's great that you include both ends of the spectrum like that. I think a lot of people would get a lot out of that. People like well, okay, so Aronofsky's obviously an atheist. He hasn't made any kind of secret about that. So what do you think his intentions with this movie was he just trying to promulgate his own worldview, or was he like actually trying to come after Christians, or somewhere in between?
Well, you know, that would be very speculative to try to figure out what he's trying to do. I don't know if it's all that fair. But from where I stand, from just what I've seen, like objectively, you know, he has said that I'm godless. He said this: I'm godless, and my God is filmmaking. Mm-hmm. And so he's expressed that really his religion is basically storytelling. So I think he loves myths, he loves stories and of all kinds. And just like you and me, I mean, I loved the Epic of Gilgamesh. I thought it was a great ancient pagan Babylonian novel. It's fascinating, good storytelling. And I read stuff like that, and I incorporate it. Like, you know, I even turned Gilgamesh into one of my novels, and I subverted it with my Christian worldview. So what I'm saying is he loves all stories, and even I would grant him just what I would grant myself, which is, interest in all stories and myths, no matter where they come from. But and I wouldn't even try to say, well, this is what I think he's doing. What I would just say is, as a professional storyteller myself, and I traffic in this world, and I'm just completely confident that when storytellers, we all do this. Whenever we retell another story, like another sacred story, like if I retold the Epic of Gilgamesh, of course I spin it through my worldview, because I don't believe in that worldview. So and I do it subtly, and because it's not even necessarily because I have this goal to overthrow Babylonianism, because and I'm not going to judge Aronofsky's motives that he's trying to destroy Christianity, but I do know this. If you do have a belief that's very common, environmentalism, I think, is now the god of this age. It's the spirit of the age. It's the zeitgeist. It's the thing that's sort of like plowing over people and just through irrationality, just dominating people's emotions and using it as a tool to destroy people with bad environmental policy. I just think it's this monster religion. And it doesn't really have much science to base it on, so it's very, very religious and faith-oriented, right? And I think that and a lot of people are sucking into this, and of course, if most of the world is still affected by the Judeo-Christian paradigm, and that story is, and you can find that story in the Bible, well, it makes perfect sense that if you want to communicate to that world, wouldn't you want to sort of take their story and spin it through your environmental paradigm? In other words, it makes perfect sense that that's what you would do. I can't read his mind, but I can just say as a storyteller, that's what I do. Every storyteller does that. You spin it through your worldview, and it's not even saying that, like for instance, I wouldn't even say I wouldn't even say that it's possible to be totally objective and only tell the worldview through the original, because in a sense, all storytelling is retelling through our own view, like for instance, my retelling of Gilgamesh, I sort of tell it in such a way that it explains where the ancient people came up with these ideas that I don't agree with, but I respect them enough that if they exist and a lot of people believed it, then there's something to them. So in my worldview, Christian worldview, I try to figure out, well, how can I explain the existence of these weird beliefs about gods and such, and for instance, that Gilgamesh was 2/3 God and 1/3 man, and he was a giant. Well, how do you explain that? Well, it's interesting, because maybe that's a pagan twisted version of what the Bible said was going on, which is angels, they called them gods, right? The pagans would call them gods, but maybe it was the angels, and so that Gilgamesh is an interpretation, a spin of what may have really happened. And so I'm going to look at that and retell the story, and of course I'm going to try to make sense of it through my worldview. And it's not always like I'm not saying it's a malicious thing, or like, I don't know, I'm trying to destroy, it could be, but nevertheless, that's how storytelling operates. And I think that's what I want to communicate to people is like, folks, storytelling is inherently subversive, and especially if you're telling someone else's story, you're going to spin it through your take. And people who like it and agree with it will love it. People who don't agree with that are gonna like it. But the better you can tell your story, the more likely other people might be open enough, and the more entertaining you make it, the more people might open up who wouldn't agree, Thus, I think, movies like Avatar have a far better effect on promoting paganism, earth worship, than something like Noah, because Avatar is just a more honest, straightforward, pagan story in a way, But in a way, they also subvert, Avatar was subverting American exceptionalism and subverting by making all these little references throughout that story. So everyone subverts in their stories, and particularly in Hollywood. I'm not saying it's not a conspiracy theory. It's not a conspiracy theory. I'm just saying that's how storytelling works, folks. That's what happens. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that you answered that way, because that's how I feel about it too. There have been a lot of posts online lately bashing Aronofsky, not not even, I mean, as a filmmaker and all that, but even as a person, it's like, okay, we don't know him.
Yeah,
I know things about him. I know that he's an atheist. It seems that he leans on the side of environmentalism.
and
He's
that's
definitely,
important. It's important
yeah,
to know.
yeah, absolutely. But can we really judge a man's motives just based on that? And I would agree with you there that instead of, bashing the person himself, it's better to decide, what about the product, in this case, a film, that we like and don't like, and for what reasons. I agree with you. It's not fair to say, well, he's trying to destroy the church, or he's trying to, you know, pick any number of things that have been on posts
Yeah,
lately. Because we just don't know, and it could just be that that's just how it came out. And yeah, you're right. I mean, even in when I haven't gotten too much into fiction writing myself yet, but the books that I have written, I try to be as objective as I can, but it's still, I'm the one writing it. I can't get outside of myself. Some of it's going to be filtered through my own worldview in different ways, and that it's just how it is, even with stuff that's not fiction,
yeah,
like that, and especially with biblical research, because there's just so much that we have to look into other things to decide what we're going to believe and why, and a lot of times those beliefs change. I mean, if I had a nickel for every time that I've changed my view on a non-salvation issue.
yeah. Me too, man. And oh, by the way, I do want to add this. You jogged my memory. As a matter of fact, Aronofsky has said that, he comes from a Jewish background. I mean, he's not a believing Jew, but he comes from a Jewish background. Believing Jew meaning someone who believes in Torah as being the sacred text of God.
Right.
But he was raised that way, and so he was told those stories. So it really is in his background. Absolutely, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, and that's great. And so that's why I believe he's always been fascinated by that story. And let's be honest, there are lots of flood stories all around in every religion, and that's why I think the Noah story is so universal, which is why I felt like it probably was they blew a great opportunity, because if you could have made a really good universal story about Noah, it would have made more money more money than the Passion of the Christ, right? Because there's polarization with Jesus, right? But not as much with Noah. Everybody loves Noah, right? And so why would you want to make him this negative, dark image and all this other stuff that the religious people would probably bristle at least a significant amount would. But nevertheless, that is his background. He loved that story, and because he sees the world in a certain way, he's going to spin that myth as he sees it, as a myth, and he's going to spin it, and it's natural. It's not all evil.
I agree with you. I don't know why that reminded me, but that just brought me to another thought when you were talking about the kind of dark nature of Noah in the film. When we read in the Bible. And this was something that you brought up in a previous blog, and I thought it was so cool, because the conclusion you came to is actually the same belief I have, and I haven't met too many people that share this same belief. But when we read the biblical account of Noah, it would seem there are mistakes that were made, and one of the things that I was always brought up with, and I don't believe in this interpretation anymore, but the things that I was always brought up with was after the flood, he got drunk and took all his clothes off and passed out, and that was somehow like this horrible thing that brought on God's curse, and like all this stuff, and I believed that for the longest time until I read outside of Genesis to what some of those words meant, and then I read your blog where you brought that up, and I thought that was so cool. Is that something that they covered in the movie? And if so,
No.
how did they? And they
No,
didn't.
he took it pretty straightforward. I mean, he does get drunk, he's naked, and they walk backwards and all this stuff, and Ham sees him, and Ham in the movie, like, one of the few interesting things is Ham is the darker character, and we know that Ham is the person whose line the Canaanites came from, and the Canaanites were the ones that need to be pushed out of land, right? So, that was kind of cool. I'll admit that, Ham was the dark character, and but yeah, so he just did it straightforward, and I don't blame him. Most people don't catch it because it's a deeper thing. But the basic truth is that the phrase "uncovering your father's nakedness," it's actually a idiomatic phrase that's used multiple times throughout the rest of the Old Testament, and it's used in more clearly defined ways where it says having sexual intercourse with a man's wife is uncovering a man's nakedness. Several times it mentions that, and so it explains that that's an idiom. So it's an idiomatic phrase, and I think that maybe the writers are being sort of subtle and circumspect by saying that, but therefore, when you read that Ham uncovered the nakedness of Noah, biblically interpreted, that more than likely means that Ham may have raped his mother, basically had sex with Noah's wife, and that would also make sense then why the fruit of that union, Canaan, was cursed, because interestingly in that text, if you read the text where it talks about right after the flood and talks about Ham and uncovering the nakedness and all that, it keeps saying Ham was the father of Canaan, Ham was the father of Canaan, as if it has to explain that he is. And it would make sense that if Canaan was the fruit, if Canaan was born to Noah's wife, you would have to be explaining that didn't come from Noah. It didn't come from Noah, and that's why it's cursed, because the incest is sort of a symbolic cursing. And then, of course, Canaan is the source of the people of Canaan, and they're cursed. See, so there's a very strong theological theme going on there that makes more sense when you understand those terms, rather than like a ridiculous taboo that. I mean, people saw each other's nakedness back then a lot, I mean, they didn't have all the, I mean, they wore clothes, but I mean, what I'm saying? Like, they were closer to nature in that sense. And so nakedness was not as much of an issue, but it's the context and what that phrase actually means. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Man, they should have put that in the movie. Maybe it would have.
Yeah. I would have supported that part.
Yeah,
and by
absolutely.
The way, that's what I did in my novels. I actually have that in my novels. So I try to keep up on a lot of scholarship in order to whatever I'm doing, to sort of include some scholarship conclusions and stuff. But like you say, there is scholarship for multiple views of just about everything. So, like you said, I've also changed my mind about a lot of things, and I'm still in the process of changing my mind about things. So, it's still exciting though to study and to explore and to provide this. So that's why, for me, excuse me, when dealing with this Noah story and how we even relate to the movie, be careful that you're really focusing on the most important things, the meaning of the story. The little details are really just going to ruin what you have to say, because the little details are in my opinion not as important. Now, the little details can add up and point to something that's bad, no problem with that. But just having watchers as rock people is not inherently offensive to me. It's just stupid filmmaking.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So I gotta ask. I don't even have this written as a question, but I'm just curious because you've written about this and studied it, and it's something that I've studied and written about too. After the flood, we kind of see in the Bible, we see a return of these giants that we kind of touched on earlier, and there seems to be a kind of split. And I don't want to make it like anything contentious or anything like that, but I'm just curious. What's your view on the return of the Nephilim? Do you believe multiple incursions, or where do you stand on that?
Yeah, Rob Skiba actually has been influential in me on that. In fact, I was in the middle of writing, and I altered some of my novel text based on Rob's arguments for a single incursion. And but here's how I dealt with it. Now, in a novel, I like to try to be a little bit ambiguous, and I like to have enough in there for both views so that you can, so that you can sort of it can make sense no matter what. So, for instance, my flood story, you could believe in the global flood or a local flood, and I'm not making an argument for either. It actually fits with either perspective, as well as so the multiple incursions thing. I'm at this point, it makes sense to me that it was basically one incursion, and the connection of the Nephilim is genetic. However, there's no, because we're not told much, it doesn't say that if angels could do it once, then they could do it again, right? So, I mean, why don't they? So what I came up with in my imaginative story was, I basically came up with that most of them were imprisoned who did that at the flood, but there were some left, 70 of them, and they were the 70 who were over the nations, right? So they're still evil. And there could be other fallen angels, and why couldn't angels do it again? But they don't, and I think the reason why is the flood was so extreme that they know if we do this again, it's going to happen again, or something. But here's the thing, though, so I don't see any other reference anywhere else to any other that activity happening again. But you do see the giants, and they do say these giants are connected to the Nephilim, who are in Genesis 6. So that makes sense to me, and therefore, you could either if you believe in a global flood, then you'd have to conclude then either the angels were doing it again, and it doesn't say anything about that, or it came through genetically one of the wives of Noah. Noah was pure, it says, but it doesn't say anything about the wives, and they could be genetically recessive gene. That's possible. So I actually have that in my book. I have sort of both, actually, in my book, in my books. And then later on, when you get around the time of Abraham and the time of Sodom and Gomorrah, here's the one thing that makes me go, but I wonder if they might have considered trying it again. Because when you look at the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, it's so extreme, unlike anything else, that it tells me, man, I wonder if there's something else serious going on there. And ironically, Sodom and Gomorrah is referenced in Jude and Peter, where it talks about, the angels that sinned who were imprisoned before the flood, just like Sodom and Gomorrah, they went after strange flesh. And then when you read back in Sodom and Gomorrah, the sin or the evil of going after strange flesh, I have to say, I don't think it's homosexuality there. It's clearly saying they're going after angels, and it's humans wanting to have sex with angels. So I thought, well, how did they know they were angels? So I came up with the theory. It's just fun, but it makes sense of it all. That one of the fallen angels, Azazel, had gotten loose, and he was trying to. No one else would do it, but he was trying to start it up again, doing it a little bit. And the people of Sodom and Gomorrah were so familiar with angelic flesh that they could sense it in these two angels that came, and so that's why they were going after them. But then of course God completely destroys it, and then it's like, oh wow, okay, So there was some that were created through that, but by and large, it's still mostly linked to the original incursion. So you see how that I like, I'm open to that. I'm open to the fact. Just because the Bible doesn't say any more reference to the sons of God doing it again, doesn't mean it can't be, but it is a strong indication to me that it probably wasn't. So maybe we should think of a different theory of how to figure that out. I don't know. Where do you stand on that?
I don't know. I used to be straight up multiple incursion, and actually, much like you, Rob Skiba presented some really convincing arguments that kind of changed my mind and got me to look into it again. Because before that point, before I saw his presentation, I was just starting to kind of research this stuff, and I didn't really look into that too much at the point. But after I saw his presentation, I went back into the Bible myself, and I did something that I've never done before. I researched into the genealogies, because I always used to think they were kind of dull or boring, but yeah. Once I was actually looking for something, I was like, wow, this is really interesting, because you can trace all of the fathers in that line, and if the idea that the fallen angels that mated with women were only men, they kind of have to be to impregnate a woman, but if that's true and all of the men can be traced, I started to realize, I don't really see any room for angels here, but so I kind of abandoned that, and from after that I figured, well, the most logical thing would be the outside of multiple incursions would be the wife of Noah's son, and I looked into that, and there's strong evidence there. I've heard other theories about that there might have been, because after the flood there probably would have been, dead bodies everywhere of these Nephilim things. There could have been some kind of genetic experiment, and it's interesting to think about. I don't think there's as much evidence supporting that, but it's a possibility. And um,
Oh,
and
you know what?
what?
I was going to say, you were mentioning after the flood, it talks about Nimrod, and there's indications that Nimrod may have been a giant. And
Yes.
who is he related to?
Yes, exactly. It's that same line. I'm glad you reminded me of that, because that's something that I wrote about too. Yeah, if you look back into the Hebrew, he did it would seem to indicate he did something to alter himself, that he may have started off totally human, but he did something to defile himself. That's what it says in the Hebrew, to make himself into this. Well, it said, if I remember right, it says like giant hunter, or something like that.
Yeah,
And yeah, and there's different interpretations of that, but it would seem that there was some type of genetic change there, and that's really interesting too. Yeah, I'm glad you reminded me of that.
Okay, now my view is a little different in that I see where you're going with that. I just saw it as, it says he began to be the first mighty man on the earth or something like that, and it's the word Gibberim, and it doesn't say he's a Nephilim, but
Right.
it does say he's a Gibberim.
And that can mean a lot of things.
That could be a lot of things, and you're right. It could be he becomes that, or it's just it doesn't talk about his Nephilim inheritance, but the connection is he's a Gibberim, he's this mighty king rebelling before God. There's maybe a subtle connection that, and he's also, I believe, he's in the line of, is it Cain? Canaan?
Yeah,
I gotta look that up. And so my point being that, well, it's important that he's coming from that line, and then maybe there's something genetically through one of the wives of Noah's sons, is what I was saying.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, there could also be a something that he changes himself afterwards. But what I was saying is, it wouldn't be alien to suggest that there is a hinting at him having some lineage going back.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. That's what's tough about that word Gibberim, because it could mean, it could be connected with Nephilim. It could mean giant, but it could also just mean mighty men.
Warrior.
Yeah, and it could just be totally human, and so it is tough with that word. So yeah, there's definitely different ways to look at it, but at the very least, he definitely was of that line. It's pretty easy to trace back, and of that cursed line. And if that is, like the Bible says, where this new branch of Nephilim or whatever came from, it would stand to reason there's at least some kind of genetic component to that from birth in Nimrod. So yeah, it's definitely interesting. And yeah, I never thought about the 70 angels over the nations and connecting that with a possible return of the Nephilim. That's really interesting. I haven't thought about that before, but yeah, there could be something there too.
I use it in my book, and that's another good excuse for doing fiction, is that you can make jumps, or you can make connections that I wouldn't sit there and argue this is what I believe, but it's like, oh, it's a possibility. Well, that'll be fun in the story. And my conclusion was, well, everywhere it talks about that famous chapter in Deuteronomy 32:8, where it says that at the Tower of Babel, when God divided the nations, he placed them under the sons of God. But then it also says elsewhere that that those who worship the sons of God on other nations, it describes them as evil. So to me, it seems to me that, okay, there's 70 Gentile nations that represents everything, so there's at least 70, and there are 70 sons of God in other pagan religions, so there might be some connection there. And I thought, well, so my general reaction would be that God would have imprisoned all the 200 angels who before the flood, so that they wouldn't do it again. But then, because there's this sort of like 70 nations right after, and God places them under the authority, and their authority are evil, I thought, well, maybe there were 70 of them that didn't get bound, and these are those 70. Or it could be a new 70, right? Because, just because there's one falling away doesn't mean there could be another. But nevertheless, playing with what we've got. I don't know that that's like the answer, but it made sense to me, and I thought, well, because those sons of God that he places under the authority are definitely in other passages referred to as evil. They're not good, he says, they worship the host of heaven, and that doesn't just mean the stars. That was a reference to the sons of God, right? And he said that these different nations do that, and they're demons. And so it's like, okay, well then how does that all fit with the picture that we have? And so that's kind of what I've been playing with. I don't know, but I do know that I used to scoff at territorial authorities and territorial spirits type of thing. I always thought that was sort of a goofy, charismatic thing, And I have to admit I was wrong because it's in the Bible. And how it plays out, that, who knows for sure. But, I had to recognize, and it all began with recognizing in Daniel, you've got the Prince of Persia and the Prince of Greece, and they're clearly fighting, and their authorities over those nations. And then you realize that there's talk about principalities and powers even in the New Testament. And the ancient conception is that principalities were over nations or cities or whatever, and they sort of operated in conjunction. So whatever happened to the city was also happening to the authority, to the principality. And that's what you get in Daniel, where he talks that way, and so I had to accept it because it's in the Bible, and it's like, okay. And then I saw that other passage, Deuteronomy 32:8, and I'm like, okay, this is a concept that goes back farther. And so I tried to incorporate that into Chronicles of Nephilim in a way that I said, okay, here's another thing that was always kind of odd to me, the gods of the ancient world. And the gods of the ancient world, in the Bible, God doesn't treat those gods as if they don't exist. He treats them with a certain kind of reality. And sometimes he even calls them demons, right? So how literal is that? I'm not sure, but it gives me an indication that these gods are not just made-up things. And I said, well, what if the gods of the ancient world were real supernatural beings with supernatural powers, only they weren't literal gods as we would conceive it, but rather they were these fallen angels who had been given authority over the pagan nations, and the pagan nations worship false gods, and so maybe they're pretending to be gods and drawing worship away. And that's kind of what I did with the Chronicles and the Nephilim, and it seems to make at least theological sense for me. And I weave that through the story, and it'll go all the way up to Jesus, because, like I said, I think that Christ. There's a lot of talk about how when Christ goes down into Hades and he leads out captives, right? And and it says he announces his triumph, and the language there is like the military triumph that the ancient Near Eastern kings, when they triumphed over someone, they would parade the victims through the streets, and the victim king, he would be bound usually, and they would parade them through the streets as sort of like mockery and sort of, this is, he's under our authority and power and all this kind of stuff. And that's what the language is used of Jesus after he goes to Hades, and after he dies, goes to Hades, and he raises, and he's exalted to the right hand of God, and he leads the train of those captives. So there's a lot of language of like that. I think there's certainly at least a strong spiritual legal triumph over those pagan authorities that Christ brings, that allows the gospel now to sort of go forth into all the nations, because the pagan nations are no longer blinded by these deities, and all nations can come to Christ. You see what I'm saying? So that's kind of where it leads. And I know that there are Christians who say, well, the story goes on beyond that and into the end times and future and stuff. But that's pretty much where I think my story is going to end. And it's just an exciting storyline that it's not just speculative sort of fantastic stuff. It means something. It's about God and his relation to us, authority. It talks about the power and authority of God in a world that we look around us, and sometimes it often does feel like it's controlled by evils, but God is still marching through and accomplishing his purposes, these kinds of things. And ultimately Christ, as the Messiah, will have victory over these principalities and powers. And as a matter of fact, I know that in scholarly circles that's a theory that's called Christus Victor. And I discovered that that's the storyline that I'm pretty much telling. So it's exciting.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Now, I'll say too, going back to the Deuteronomy 32 thing, if people try to look that up in the King James, it says sons of Israel, and but I don't know why it was translated that way, because in in the original, it does say sons of God. You know, even the Septuagint translates it as sons of God. In the King James, it'll say sons of Israel, but when you really think about that, it makes more sense that it was just a mistranslation of sorts, because back in the time that it's referring to, the Tower of Babel, there was no Israel. There was no, the sons of Israel. And when the proper understanding of, sons of God, it really makes more sense and brings the whole story together. And actually, we talked about Michael Heiser before. He has a really interesting teaching on that as well. But
and you can get it at his website, I might add, michaelsheiser.com. He has a lot of free articles on that. And one of his sub websites, I think, is the Divine Council, and I think that's where he writes a lot about that stuff. Absolutely, go check that out.
Yeah, definitely. I'd highly recommend it as well. I've spent just hours listening to his stuff on YouTube and checking out his website and stuff. It's a lot of fantastic research, and that was something that opened my eyes. So there seems to be a lot more lately of these epic releases in the film industry of biblically based themes, like the Noah movie we've been talking about, and there was the Son of God movie that was based on that the History Channel's Bible miniseries. And there's going to be, from what I understand, there's going to be a movie based on Moses and the Exodus coming out soon. And a lot of Christians out there have been vocal in their online posts that these things seem to be riddled with inaccuracies. So how are we to take all of these new movies and themes coming out? Like with Noah, we talked about that, and should it be the same with all these new ones, or what if there is? Because from what I think Moses is being done by Ridley Scott, if I'm not mistaken.
Scott. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's, I personally, I'm not much of an Aronofsky fan anyway. My first exposure to him, I think, was The Fountain, and
that's terrible.
Yeah. It was pretty rough, but now Ridley Scott, that's different. I think he can actually. Yeah, absolutely. So I would have more hopes that it would be at least entertainment-wise a good movie. So should we, with something like that, should we take the same stance as with the Noah movie, like go there expecting to be entertained, but maybe not theologically fed, or are there different ways to take some of these things coming out?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question, Josh, because sometimes it gets so downright antagonistic with Christians, that they really do sometimes just attack Christianity and such, that if you're a normal moviegoer that just likes to watch movies, it's like I don't see a lot of good reason for it. I'm in the business, I have to interact, I watch a lot of movies, but for people who are looking for some good entertainment that will be encouraging, if you hear that it's pretty antagonistic to your faith, why bother? Why bother to just get attacked? Yeah, I definitely believe in having a conversation and being able to talk to people about it. And if you want to talk to people about it, yeah. And if it's a big event like Noah, then maybe seeing it might be an advantage. But I'd rather, like these other ones coming out. Ridley Scott's an atheist too, so I don't know that he's going to be all that favorable. We'll see. Wait and see what the reviews say, and see if if there's some reviewer that you trust, and then take their advice. Don't see it opening weekend. Wait and see what they say about it, because who knows? Like I said, Ridley Scott had Jesus as an alien in Prometheus, so God only knows what he's going to do. And Moses, I don't know, So I'm not very hopeful though, because Hollywood does not when they hire their secular progressives and their atheist directors and stuff. Like I said, of course they're going to spin it through their worldview. So, it's hard to really recommend unless I've really seen it and I can say, it's not perfect, but it's got this, and this, So
absolutely,
that's all I can do.
Cool. In Prometheus, the connection between Jesus and aliens, was that something that was just in the script? Because I don't remember that in the movie.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, there's a scene where they're looking at that art on the wall, And if you look closely, there's a little Christ figure on a cross.
Oh, okay.
And the alien thing, yeah. And it's been a while since I've seen it, but I believe there's some kind of reference in there about, like, it's a vague reference, like, yeah, we visited there 2,000 years ago or something like that. I can't remember the details, unfortunately.
Yeah.
In fact, I wonder if I blogged on it. I go back and check my blog. I think I did. So do a search on my blog for Prometheus and. I
actually think that's where I read about it, because I think you had said that it was in the script, and they didn't end up putting it in the movie, but in the script they said, yeah, it was supposed to be that they visited and they tried to send one of theirs, and we killed him, and it was Jesus and all that. Yeah, exactly. Have you heard anything about the anything that we might not know about the new Moses movie?
No,
the only
really.
thing. Yeah.
I bet they're sweating and keeping it under wraps, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, there's not much information. The only thing I've heard is that it's Ridley Scott, and I think Christian Bale is playing the lead as Moses.
Yeah, that's about it. That's about all I know.
Cool. Well, it's something to keep our eyes on. Well, where are we at here?
I'm going to wrap it up because I've got a bunch of calls here for other interviews. They're trying to get me.
Is this your first interview since seeing the movie?
Second. I had another one earlier, but I got some other people winning it.
That close.
You got it. You got the good one.
Good deal.
The other one was only like 15 minutes or something, 10 minutes. So.
Oh, okay. So cool. Well, I got the first full-length interview then.
Fair enough.
Well, yeah, it does look like we're almost out of time. Unfortunately, it's a blast talking to you. If people want to find out more about you or your books, blogs, everything else, where can they go to do that?
Well, my catch-all website is Godawa.com and Godawa.com. But that sort of lists all my movies and books I've worked on and stuff like that. And you can access my blog through that. But I always tell people to go to chroniclesofthenephilim.com, because that's sort of all my novels, and I also have my blog linked there as well, and you can get a lot of free articles and stuff. So yeah, those are the two websites, chroniclesofthenephilim.com or Godawa.com. Or if it's easier to just remember, noahprimeval.com, that works too. In fact, let's put that up there. See it? Is it up there now?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's up there now. Yeah, so noahprimeval.com will take you there, and then you can see all kinds of great stuff there. And then, of course, just if you go to Amazon Direct, and type in my name as an author, you'll see the books, and there's a lot of stuff you can read about it, and you can read reviews too. So they're all sold on Amazon in Kindle, paperback, but also audiobooks, and audiobooks are doing pretty well. People are loving audiobooks, so yeah.
Oh, cool. Awesome, all good stuff. Well, I want to thank you so much for being on the show, giving us your time, and sharing your views with us.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, anytime. Again, that was Brian Godawa, filmmaker and author of the Chronicles of the Nephilim series. I would highly suggest checking out his phenomenal work and his blogs too. If you would like to check out more episodes of The Sharpening, or wish to look into some of the books I've written, you can do so on my website, ministudyministry.com. And if you believe in what we're doing here and would like to contribute, there's a place on the website for that as well. All right, well, we are all out of time, so I would like to thank you all for watching and or listening. This is The Sharpening, and I am your host, Josh Peck. As always, take care and God bless.